The coins were the color of old blood. 3 of them stacked in a small, careful palm, a palm with 4 fingers and skin the pale silver green of new lichen, pressed flat against the edge of the processing desk like an offering at a shrine. The child couldn't have been more than 6 years old by human reckoning. Maybe 7. Hard to say with Velhari young. Their eyes ran large, almost the full width of the face in the very young, and hers were the deep amber of tree sap frozen mid-drop. She had pressed her small body against the counter until only her chin and those eyes crested it, and she was staring at him with the terrifying directness of a child who has not yet learned to be afraid of looking. Marcus Hale was 41 years old, a licensed interspecies placement coordinator for the Carith Station Transit Authority, and he had worked the processing desk for 11 years. He had seen things at that desk that rewired a man. He had seen a Drenathi widow carry 3 dead children through his line in a fever-induced fugue, not yet knowing they were dead. He had processed 812 war refugees from the outer corridor collapse in a single 6-week surge, one of the worst seasons Carith had ever seen. He had once watched a Volkai elder trade his last name, his entire lineage designation, a thing his people treated as sacred as the bones of the dead, for a transit permit to somewhere warm. He had never in 11 years had a child place coins on his desk and say what this child said next. "Sir," her voice was reed-thin, careful, like she'd rehearsed it many times in a small space. "Can these 3 rusty coins buy a father?" The processing hall went quiet in the way a large space goes quiet when everyone in it has heard something and chosen, simultaneously, to pretend they haven't. The ambient hum of the circulation fans seemed to get louder. Somewhere behind Marcus, a data terminal pinged twice. The Drenathi family 3 places back in the queue held very still. Even the automated sorting arm in the luggage bay slowed, as if the station itself had paused to listen. He looked at the coins. They were Velhari merchant tokens, old ones, the kind used before the Velhari joined the compact, before standardized currency made them obsolete. Thick, hexagonal, with a raised crest on one face that had been worn nearly smooth. They were the color of rust and dull copper and things left out in weather. They were worth, in contemporary exchange, approximately nothing. Less than nothing, probably. They weren't even good collector's pieces, being too common and too damaged. They were the kind of thing a child might find in a gutter or a grandmother's drawer and decide were treasure because they were old and heavy and serious looking, and the hand that had held them before yours was a hand you loved. Marcus Hale set down his stylus. He leaned forward on his elbows and looked at the child over the rim of the desk, and he said, very carefully, "Who told you to come here?" She blinked. Those enormous amber eyes didn't waver. "Nobody, I came myself." "Where are your—" He stopped, reformulated. "There were questions you asked and questions you didn't, not because you were afraid of the answer, but because you were paying enough attention to already know it. Is there a grown-up with you today?" "No," said without apology or distress, without the slight pitch upward that would mean she was hoping he'd offer something. Just a fact, delivered flat and complete. "I don't have grown-ups." Behind her, the line stretched back, a long coiling queue of travelers, settlers and refugees moving through Carith Station's primary transit hub, all doing that careful human thing of looking everywhere, except at the small silver-green child at the front of it. A Drenathi family with too much luggage. 2 human miners still bearing the particular gray dust of the extraction tunnels on their coveralls. A Volkai merchant with luggage stacked so high it threatened the weight sensor overhead. None of them moved. None of them said anything. There was a quality to their collective stillness that Marcus recognized, the stillness of people who are feeling something they haven't been asked to feel and don't know what to do with it. "Okay," Marcus said slowly. "What's your name?" "Sale." She pronounced it the Velhari way, the vowel held half a beat longer than a human mouth naturally wanted to hold it, a liquid, sustained note that standard speakers usually flattened into a single syllable and were always wrong about. "Sale of no house." The Velhari naming convention was something Marcus had learned in the interspecies relations module of his certification training 20 years ago now, and what he remembered was this. A Velhari child without a house was not an orphan in the human sense, not exactly. A house wasn't just a family, it was a legal entity, a cultural designation, a lineage thread connecting you to everything that had come before and everything that would come after. To be of no house was to be unconnected. Unregistered. A gap in the record. The suffix wasn't a cruelty, the Velhari didn't intend it as one. It was simply an accurate description, the way you might say a ship was unregistered or a claim was unlodged. But it hit Marcus somewhere behind the sternum anyway. The specific weight of an accurate description that should have been inaccurate. A child who should have had a house. How long have you been of no house, Sale? She appeared to think about this with great seriousness, the way children think when a question touches something they have already turned over many times and arrived at the same answer to every time. Since I remember. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back. The coins sat between them, dull, rust-edged, genuinely worthless, and she had her hand very close to them on the counter's edge, as if she might need to take them back if the negotiation went wrong. How did you get to this station? Cargo transit. The particular flatness of someone delivering information they know will cause a reaction and have decided to deliver cleanly regardless. Box 7 of Container Row C. I checked the manifest. It was a permitted humanitarian transfer, food goods, medical supplies, sealed non-perishables for the Compact Relief Program. I wasn't touching the actual goods. A pause. I was careful. I didn't touch anything. Cargo transit, Marcus repeated, at the same neutral tone he used when a piece of information was landing in him, and he needed a moment for it to settle. As in you stowed away in a freight container. I was very small. The box had a packing gap. There was room. She said it the way a child says something they know is technically wrong but has decided to own regardless, because the reasoning behind it was sound, and she'd like the reasoning to be acknowledged even if the method can't be. I'm good at being still. He became aware that he was almost smiling and made himself stop. Where were you before the cargo transit? For the first time, something flickered across those amber eyes. Not fear or not only fear. Something older than fear, the quality of a landscape that has survived too much weather and knows the shape of it. Veth Processing Camp, she said. Outer Corridor, Sector 9. He knew the camp. Everybody in transit and humanitarian coordination work knew it, the way you know the names of the bad ones. Not as abstractions but as living documents. The kind of place that generated paperwork for years and kept generating it. A slow emergency that the aid organizations addressed in the acute phase, and then filed away when the media cycle moved on, and the situation calcified from crisis into chronic. Sector 9 was one of the worst of the processing nodes established after the outer corridor collapse, understaffed at inception, and never adequately resourced afterward, overcrowded within 18 months, reliant on compact relief transfers that arrived inconsistently and disappeared quickly. It had been meant as a temporary way station. 3 years later, 12,000 individuals were registered residents of a place that had been designed to hold 4,000 for 6 months. How long were you in Sector 9? He asked. Since I remember, she said again, the same words, the same tone. He understood now that this was not a poetic answer and not evasion. This was the literal extent of her knowable history. The camp was the beginning of the world as she had experienced it, and everything before the camp existed only as the things her mother had said. Marcus Hale sat back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. It was a gesture he wasn't aware he'd made until he was done making it. He was not a man given to impulsive decisions. He was, if anything, precisely the opposite. A man who had spent 11 years watching impulsive decisions destroy people in small and large ways, watching parents separated from children at security gates because someone hadn't filed the right form at the right time, watching families arrive with everything they owned and lose it because they'd trusted a transit agent who told them to relax, don't worry, the system will sort it. He believed in process. He believed in documentation. He believed that the system, slow and grinding and maddening, and shaped like a machine designed by too many committees, existed for a reason that mattered even when the machine was failing, because the alternative to a failing system was no system, which was worse. He looked at the coins. He thought about a child calculating what she needed and what she had, and deciding that a cargo box was the bridge between them. He thought about the math a 6-year-old runs in the dark of a processing camp, the specific, self-reliant math of a person who has learned that waiting for rescue is a theory and that moving under your own power is a fact. He thought about her sitting in Box 7 of Container Row C, in the dark and the cold of unpressurized freight, being still for 18 hours because she was good at it. He thought about 3 rusty coins and what you have to believe about the world to think they might work. The logic of it was devastating in its simplicity. She had the only currency she had. She had come to the place where things were exchanged, and she had asked. She had done everything right, by the only map she'd been given. "Sale," he said, "those coins don't work that way." Her expression didn't change, but her hand moved fractionally closer to the coins. "But," he said, before she could take them back, and he wasn't sure why he said it. It was not a decision he made so much as a thing that was already happening by the time he was aware of it. "I'm going to need you to wait right here for a few minutes. Can you do that?" She studied him, that careful, measuring look, the quality of attention in a child who has learned to read adult intention the way you read weather, for what it actually means, not what it says. "Are you going to call someone to take me somewhere?" "Not yet," he said. "I'm going to find out a few things first. There are processes, forms." He pulled a form from his desk drawer, a general welfare intake form, the kind he hadn't used in about 6 months, because situations that warranted it were supposed to be routed to the Family Services Division and usually were. He uncapped a pen, an actual ink pen. He'd learned years ago that children trusted physical pens more than styluses, something about the visibility of the mark, the permanence of it, the fact that a pen on paper looked like a promise and a stylus on a tablet looked like a thing you could take back. "Can I ask you some more questions while you wait?" She glanced at the form with the rapid, cataloging look she seemed to have for everything. Then she looked at the pen. Then, with the gravity of someone signing a document that matters, she nodded and put her elbows on the counter, mirroring his posture precisely, and waited. Her file when he found it, which took 3 hours, 2 interdepartmental transfers, a conversation with a records officer in the Outer Corridor Bureau, who seemed personally offended that Marcus was asking and twice suggested he redirect to the Family Services Division, and 1 call to the compact humanitarian registry that put him on hold for 40 minutes, and then connected him to someone who'd been connected to someone who'd been connected to someone else, was 6 lines long. 6 lines. Name, species, status, house designation, and 2 parent fields. Name, sale, species, Velhari, status, ward of the compact, unaffiliated. House designation, none. Mother, deceased, camp fever, year 3 of the collapse. Father, listed as unknown. That was it. That was the entire administrative existence of a child who had climbed into a cargo box and ridden 18 hours through the dark to reach a station where she believed, with the absolute and uncalculating faith of the very young, that a father was something you could buy if you brought the right things and asked the right person. 6 lines. He printed the file and looked at it for a while. He went to find Sale in the family waiting area where he'd sent her an hour earlier with a cup of protein broth, and a transit worker named Denny, who was built like a cargo pallet, and had 3 kids of his own, and the particular unflappable warmth of a man who had learned through experience that children mostly just needed you to be steady and present, and not make a big thing of anything. Sale was sitting in a chair that was too big for her, legs dangling 4 inches off the floor, broth mostly untouched going cold on the table beside her, watching the door with those amber eyes. She looked at him the moment he appeared in the doorway. The quality of attention was something Marcus would think about for a long time afterward. Not hope, or not only hope. The thing underneath hope. The thing that looks like steadiness, but is actually the form stillness takes in a person who has already absorbed the possibility that the answer will be no, and decided to look at you anyway. "I came back," he said, which was unnecessary. "I see that," she said. He sat down in the chair beside her, which was also too big. The family waiting area ran adult-sized furniture throughout, which was a design flaw someone had been meaning to address for years, and he spread her file on his knee. 6 lines on a half-sheet. He showed it to her, and she read it with the focused speed of someone who can read faster than you expect, and who has learned to extract the essential information first. "That's me," she said. "That's you," he paused. "Sale, what I'm going to tell you is that the system I work in has a process for children who are wards of the compact and have no guardian listed. There are placement programs. There are review boards. There are." "I know about the programs," she said, not rudely, factually the way she said most things. "I know someone from the camp who went through placement. She was in transit housing for 7 months. Then a house took her. Then the house filed a reversal and she came back. Then she waited 4 more months. Then another house took her." A pause so small it was almost not there. "The second one kept her. She says it's fine." Another pause. This one waited with the particular care of a child communicating something she has thought about very precisely. "I don't want programs. I want a father." Marcus looked at the 6 lines of her file. "I know. The programs put you somewhere and then you wait and then people look at you and decide. Sometimes they decide yes. Sometimes they decide no. Sometimes they decide yes and then later no." She had unfolded her hands from her lap and placed them on the table, and she was looking at them, 4 fingers, the pale silver green of her skin catching the waiting room's overhead light. "I've been waiting since I remember. I don't want to wait that way anymore. I want to wait for something specific." Something in Marcus Hale's chest moved in a way it didn't often move, which was to say it moved in the way a thing moves when it has been still for a very long time, and something has disturbed it, and now it is moving again. "You have a good face," she said then, conversationally, without looking up from her hands. Like this was relevant data she was contributing to an ongoing analysis. He blinked. "I'm sorry." She looked up. "Your face." She considered it with the calm, evaluating directness she seemed to turn on everything. "It doesn't look like a face that sends things back." He thought about his apartment on level 7. 1 bedroom. A small galley kitchen that functioned perfectly well except for the light panel, which had been flickering for 8 months because he kept meaning to replace it, and then not getting around to it because the flickering wasn't bad enough to be an emergency, and a new panel required ordering parts, and he was always going to do it next week. He had 1 window that looked out on the docking bays. He had a plant on the windowsill that was, by some collective miracle of low light and occasional watering and apparently indomitable will, still alive. He had nobody to water the plant when he was on a long shift, and usually when he got back it had drooped dramatically and then recovered when he watered it. And this cycle had repeated itself for 2 years and the plant just kept going, which he respected. He thought about the paperwork, the specific, voluminous, detailed paperwork of a guardianship petition, the home assessment, the psychological evaluations, the financial documentation, the character references, the interdepartmental reviews, the provisional period, during which nothing was certain and everything was contingent, and you did everything right and then waited for a room full of strangers to decide whether you'd proven enough. Months, possibly much longer. He thought about 18 hours in a cargo box, being still, because she was good at it. "Sale," he said, If someone were going to try to be your father through the proper channels with all the right paperwork, the way it has to be done to be legal and permanent and real, it would take a long time. Months. Maybe longer than months. There would be a lot of forms, a lot of people asking a lot of questions, a lot of waiting that isn't waiting for nothing, it's waiting while things happen, but it would still feel like waiting. Do you understand that? She thought about this with genuine consideration, turning it over. Waiting I can do, she said finally. I've been doing it since I remember. Waiting for something specific is different from waiting for nothing. He looked at her. She looked back. The coins were on the table between them. She'd arranged them in a small, careful line when she sat down, 3 in a row, as if presenting evidence in a proceeding. Those coins, he said, where did you get them? Something shifted in her face. Not the older thing, not the weathered thing, something softer, something that moved the way faces move when they touch a memory that is still warm. My mother had them. She kept them in a small woven pouch. When the word she chose was precise and unadorned, with a respect for accuracy that was one of the things she had clearly inherited. When she died, the camp health workers let me keep the pouch. They said it was a personal effect. She touched the edge of the middle coin with one finger, a motion so small it was more intention than gesture. She told me they were from before the collapse, before the camp, before everything. She said her mother had them and her mother's mother. A pause then, she said they were good luck. Marcus looked at the 3 coins. Rust-edged, hexagonal, bearing the worn ghost of a crest, worthless in any exchange. Passed from hand to hand through whatever the outer corridor had been before it came apart. A dead woman's keepsake, carried by her daughter through 3 years of a camp, and 18 hours of a cargo hauled to a processing desk at Kareth Station, because the daughter had decided that love was the right currency for what she was trying to buy. They are, he said, he meant it with his whole chest, they absolutely are. He picked up his pen. He pulled a second form from his case. The one he'd collected from the family services office during the hour sale had been in the waiting room, the one he'd been sitting with since then, turning over in his mind, not quite committing to. He set it on his knee alongside her 6-line file. I'm going to need your help filling this out, he said. It's a longer form than the first one. There's a section that asks about your history which we can work through together. There's a section about your current needs. There's also a section, it's toward the end, where it asks you to describe yourself in 3 words. He looked at her. That one's not required, but I'd like to fill it out if you're willing. Sale looked at the form. She looked at the pen. She looked at him, reading him the way she read everything thoroughly, quickly, arriving at conclusions. Then she leaned over and picked up the pen very carefully, held it in her 4-fingered hand and said, 3 words. She thought for a moment with complete seriousness, the way she seemed to do everything. Small, careful, staying. Marcus wrote it down. Staying. He underlined it once lightly, so she wouldn't notice. The home assessment took 6 weeks. The assessor was a Drenathi woman named Coordinator Versal, who had approximately the emotional temperature of a frozen moon, and had been conducting family welfare assessments for 30 years, and gave absolutely no indication that this was anything other than a professional matter to be carried out with thorough, dispassionate precision. She came to Marcus's apartment 3 times. She inspected every room. She tested the emergency systems, the atmospheric controls, the water filtration. She examined the light panel in the kitchen, which was still flickering, with an expression of quiet professional judgment that did not become words. She interviewed Marcus for 2 hours each visit, working through a structured instrument that covered his employment history, his financial records, his psychological evaluation history, his support network, his reasons for pursuing this particular petition, his understanding of Velhari developmental needs, and his contingency plans for various categories of difficulty. On her second visit, she brought a reference document from the Velhari Compact's liaison office and walked him through it. Developmental milestones, dietary considerations, the cultural weight of the house designation, and what it meant that Sale had been raised without one, the ceremonies that marked Velhari childhood transitions, and how they might be handled for a child outside the traditional community. Marcus took notes. He asked questions. Versal answered them with the thorough, impartial precision of someone who had delivered this information many times, and believed in delivering it accurately regardless of the outcome of the assessment. On her third visit, she sat across from him at his kitchen table with her notes organized on a tablet and said, "The child." "Sale," he said. A fractional pause, the kind that acknowledges a correction. "Sale," she said. "She has been assessed separately by the Compact Youth Welfare Office. Their report describes her as," she referred to the document, "socially withdrawn but observationally acute. High adaptive intelligence. Demonstrates significant capacity for independent problem-solving, likely developed as an adaptive response to environmental circumstances. Guarded in interpersonal engagement but not hostile. Strong survival orientation. Attachment profile consistent with disrupted early bonding, which may present challenges in building trust relationships." A pause. "They also note that in her welfare sessions she refers to you as the man with the good face." Marcus looked at the table. "She described you," Versal continued in the same level register, "as someone whose face does not look like it sends things back. The welfare officer asked her what that meant. She said, 'Some people look at something broken and they find the part that doesn't work and they get rid of it.' She said, 'Some people look at something broken and they find the part that still does and they keep it.'" Versal set her tablet down. She was speaking about herself. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. "Coordinator Hale." Versal's voice had not changed in temperature, but something in it had shifted almost imperceptibly, the way still water shifts before something surfaces. "In 30 years I have assessed many hundreds of placements. I have seen many reasons people pursue guardianship. I have seen altruism, and I have seen performance of altruism. I have seen love, and I have seen the things people call love that are not love. I have seen people who could provide material resources and no warmth, and I have seen people with warmth and limited resources, and I have seen both succeed and both fail." She folded her hands. "In this case, a child assessed a human being, determined he was safe, traveled 18 hours in a cargo container, and presented herself at his desk with 3 non-legal tender coins to negotiate a parental relationship." A pause. "The child's judgment is relevant data." He looked up. "I will be completing my assessment as favorable," she said. She gathered her things and stood. At the threshold she paused without turning. The light panel was incorrectly fitted, a 4-cycle unit in a 6-cycle socket. "I replaced the entire fitting while you were getting water. You won't have trouble with it again." And she left. Marcus sat at his kitchen table for a while after she was gone. The kitchen light ran steady and clean, no flicker. He noticed it the way you notice a sound that has stopped, the absence of something you'd gotten used to. The provisional period lasted 4 months. Sale was housed during this time in the Compact's supervised transit residences on Level 4, a clean, well-staffed residential floor specifically maintained for children awaiting placement decisions, with schooling, recreational programming, and scheduled family contact visits. The Level 4 staff were good people, competent and warm in the institutional way that long-term transit workers became, the warmth that came not from never having seen difficulty, but from having decided to do the work of kindness despite it. Marcus visited every Tuesday and every Saturday, which were the 2 days permitted by the contact schedule. He arrived on time. He arrived early, in fact. He began leaving enough buffer into his schedule that even the worst processing delays couldn't make him late, because on his second visit he had arrived 12 minutes behind schedule due to a queue backup at the Habitat Rings Connector Junction, and when he walked into the family contact room, Sale had been sitting in a chair facing the door with her hands folded on the table. She said nothing about it. She unclenched her hands when she saw him and stood up and said hello. He noted the unclenching. He didn't say anything about it either. He started setting an alarm 2 hours before each visit from that day forward. He brought things. He researched what Velhari children typically ate, and then he learned what she specifically ate by the method of bringing a range of things and watching what she finished and what she left. And by the third visit he had a working list. He found a stall on the market level that stocked a particular dried fruit from the outer corridor growing regions, small, intensely sweet, almost impossible to find at Kareth. And he began ordering it specially, once a week, so he always had some when he came. The first time he brought it, she looked at the bag for a moment before she took it, and she held it in both hands, and the expression on her face was the kind of expression a person has when they have been seen in a specific and unexpected way and don't know yet what to do with that. He brought books, actual physical books, because she had mentioned in passing that data tablets made her eyes hurt, a legacy of the camp's salvaged low-quality displays, which had been calibrated wrong and flickered in a way that taxed Velhari visual processing, which was more sensitive to light variance than human visual systems. He brought 3 or 4 each visit and let her choose. She chose with the focused deliberateness of someone who understands that choices are real and limited, and should be made carefully. He learned things about her, the specific factual inventory of a person. He learned that she slept light and woke fast, snapping from sleep to full alertness in the way that children who have lived in uncertain environments do. Because uncertain environments teach you that the moment between sleep and waking is the moment you're most vulnerable, and the lesson goes in early and stays. He learned that she was afraid of very loud, sudden sounds, particularly metal impacts, a category that included dropped equipment, pressure doors, and cargo crane failures, and that when she heard one she went very still and her eyes went to the exits in the room, and then, after a moment, came back. She never acknowledged having done this. He never commented on it. He learned she had an extraordinary capacity for sustained, patient attention, the kind that looked like stillness from outside and was actually very active inside. The constant, methodical processing of a person who had learned that understanding your environment in detail was a survival tool. He learned she was very funny, in the dry, precise way that some people are funny, with no announcement, no performance, just observation delivered flatly that landed harder for being flat. He learned that she didn't laugh in the way most people laugh. Something would strike her as genuinely amusing and she would make a small, controlled sound, the first note of something bigger, and then stop it there. As if she'd learned early that laughing fully was a kind of exposure, a kind of letting go, and she wasn't yet certain it was safe. He worked on this, gently, over time. On his 6th visit, she let him read to her from one of the books she'd chosen. She could read perfectly well. She just liked being read to, which she admitted with the slight sideways glance of someone confessing something they consider possibly embarrassing. On his 8th visit, she fell asleep with her head against the side of his arm while he was reading and woke up 5 minutes later and didn't say anything about it, and neither did he. And both of them went back to the story as if nothing had happened, which was exactly the right response. On his 12th visit, she asked him very casually what he had eaten for dinner the previous night, and when he told her she said, "I don't like that," and he said, "Good to know," and took out the small notebook he'd started carrying and wrote it down, and the expression on her face, private, unbuttoned, there and gone, was the expression of someone who has never been written down in a small notebook before and has discovered, unexpectedly, that it means something. On his 16th visit, she asked him why he had decided to try. He had been expecting this question. He'd thought about how he wanted to answer it. He had several honest answers ready, good ones, about what it meant to have a file that was 6 lines long, about cargo boxes and determination, and the specific math of a child who has identified a destination and figured out how to reach it. He had an answer that was more articulate about what he had felt standing in that processing hall. He had an answer that invoked her mother's coins, and what it meant to carry something small and heavy from one place to another, because you believed in where you were going. Instead, he said, "You told me I had a good face. I didn't want to prove you wrong." She looked at him for a long moment with those amber eyes. Then she made the small, controlled sound, the first note of a laugh, and this time she didn't stop. It kept going, brief and genuine, and it was the best sound Marcus Hale had heard in a very long time. The finalization hearing was scheduled for 9 in the morning in a small administrative chamber on the judicial level of Carith Station. It was a room that had seen, by Marcus's rough estimate, thousands of these proceedings. The walls had the particular quality of rooms that absorb a lot of human and non-human emotion over years and develop a kind of gravitas despite themselves. Good wood paneling, or what passed for wood paneling on a station. The station crest above the adjudicator's position. Narrow windows that looked out on the station's exterior ring, and beyond it, the particular dark of the space between systems. Presiding Officer 10 was a human man of about 60, with a careful, deliberate manner and the particular quality of attention that long-term judicial officers developed, genuinely present, unhurried, treating the proceeding as if it were the only one that had ever happened and would ever happen, which was the right way to treat it. Coordinator Vershaw was there. A representative from the Compact Youth Welfare Office was there. A young Velhari woman named Officer Sae, who had interviewed Sale 3 times during the provisional period, and whose manner toward Sale was warm in a professional way that Marcus had noted and appreciated. Marcus was in the jacket he'd had cleaned for the occasion, his good one, dark, which he didn't wear often because he almost never had occasion for it. Sale was in a blue coat that the Level 4 residential staff had procured for her, carefully selected, perfectly fitted. She was sitting with her spine very straight, and her hands folded precisely on the table, and an expression of absolute formal composure that would have been comedic in its dignity, if it hadn't also been the most serious thing Marcus had ever seen. Presiding Officer 10 reviewed the documents. He asked Marcus several questions about his qualifications, his situation, his intentions, his understanding of the responsibilities involved. He asked Sale several questions, adapting his register cleanly and without condescension, which Marcus noted. He asked about the camp, about her time in transit housing, about what she understood about what today meant. Then he asked a question that neither of them had been expecting, which he directed at Sale directly. "Is there anything you would like to say about this process or about Coordinator Hale that you haven't had the opportunity to say yet?" Sale considered this question for a long, thoughtful moment. Then she said, "He's never been late." 10 nodded, with the gravity of someone receiving information that is being delivered in full. "Can you tell me more about that?" "When he says he's coming, he comes," she said. "When he says what time, that's the time. He's never been late." A pause. "He writes things down in a notebook, things I tell him so he remembers." Another pause. "He found the dried fruit from the outer corridor. You can't find it at Carith. He orders it specially." 10 was writing something. "Anything else?" Sale looked at the table for a moment. Then she said, "He doesn't make things bigger than they are. When something is hard, he says it's hard. When something takes time, he says it takes time. He doesn't tell me it'll be easy." She looked up. "I don't like it when people tell me things will be easy. Things aren't always easy, and it makes them seem like they don't know me." Vershaw, behind her expression of impartial professional composure, appeared to experience something in the approximate vicinity of a feeling. Officer Sae was looking at her hands. "Thank you, Sale," Presiding Officer 10 said, and returned to his documents. The hearing took 40 minutes. Walking out of the chamber and into the corridor, Sale walked beside Marcus the way she always walked, straight posture, measured pace, the contained physical economy of someone who doesn't make movements they don't mean. They were halfway to the lift when she put her hand in his. She did it without looking up or changing pace, or saying anything about it. Just put her small four-fingered hand into his hand, easily, as if this were simply the next logical action in a sequence she'd already worked out, and she was going to perform it now that they'd arrived at it. Her hand was about a third the size of his, and her fingers were arranged differently from human fingers, and her grip was steady and unhesitating. Marcus's throat did something complicated and private. He held her hand. They walked to the lift. He pressed 7. She watched the floor numbers count upward. He watched her profile, the large amber eyes, the silver-green skin, the set of her mouth that was serious in the same way she was always serious, and was also, he knew now, the expression she wore when she was comfortable. "Sale," he said. "Yes. The apartment has 1 bedroom. I've been thinking about the arrangements. You're getting the bedroom, it has the better window. I'll sort out the other side." She appeared to consider this, which she did by looking at the floor indicator in a focused way that had nothing to do with the floor indicator. "The couch is fine for me. I've slept in smaller spaces." "I know you have. You're still getting the bedroom." "We should look at the space before we decide," she said. Which was, Marcus recognized, the negotiating language of someone who has learned not to assume anything is settled until it is settled and to keep options open. But it was also, he thought, the language of someone who was trying out the concept of we and finding out what it felt like in the mouth. "Okay," he said, "we'll look at the space together and figure it out." She nodded once, satisfied with this outcome, and turned back to the floor indicator. The lift reached 7. The doors opened onto the residential corridor, which smelled like any residential corridor on Kareth, recycled air with the particular mineral undertone of the atmospheric systems, and the faint ghost of food from the market level that always drifted up through the ventilation, and something electric and faintly ozone-ish from the climate controls. Not beautiful, not poetic. Just ordinary, the specific ordinary of a place where people lived and were doing the ordinary things people do. He unlocked the door. She stepped inside. She stood in the center of the main room and turned in a slow, deliberate circle, looking at everything, the furniture, the work surfaces, the storage configurations, the arrangement of the space. She took her time. She looked at the window with its view of the docking bay for a moment. She looked at the small shelf of physical books he'd accumulated. She looked at the plant on the windowsill, which was, by any objective measure, thriving, which given its history was a minor miracle. She looked at the plant for a long time. "It's still alive," she said. "Barely," he said automatically, and then, "Actually, not barely anymore. It's doing well." She walked to the windowsill and crouched down to look at the plant from its own level, inspecting the leaves with the same thorough attention she gave everything. The late afternoon light from the docking bay filtered in around her, the diffuse, blue-tinted station light that was always approximating day without quite achieving it. She straightened. "I'll water it," she said, definitive, a thing decided. "Thank you," he said. "It'll appreciate the consistency." "I forget." She turned from the window and looked at him with those amber eyes, and the expression on her face was the one he'd been watching develop over 4 months of visits, the one that was slowly, incrementally replacing the older expression, the one that was not yet fully open but was moving that direction. Not the weathered landscape, something newer, something that was trying its own quality of light. "Which is the bedroom?" she said. He showed her. She looked at it for a moment from the doorway. The window there was smaller but faced the outer ring rather than the docking bay, which meant at the right time of station cycle you could see actual stars rather than ship traffic. He'd put a lamp in the corner that gave warm light rather than the standard overhead cool white. He'd replaced the bedding 3 weeks ago, when he'd accepted that she was going to be here. She said, "This is mine." "This is yours," he said. She stepped in. She walked to the window and looked out at the outer ring and whatever dark lay beyond it. She stood there for a moment, and then she turned back and she said, with a tone of someone completing an inventory and arriving at a sum that exceeds what was expected. Okay. He went to start dinner. She moved through the apartment behind him, methodically acquainting herself with the space the way she did everything, thoroughly, quietly, deciding where things were. From somewhere in the apartment she called, with careful casualness, "What are we having?" "I don't know yet." He was looking in the storage units, assessing. "What do you want?" The pause was long enough that he heard it, the specific length of a pause that is occurring because someone has been asked a question they are encountering for the first time, not as a question, but as an actual open invitation with an actual answer expected. He recognized it because he'd come to recognize how she paused, the different kinds and what they meant. "Something warm," she said finally. He pulled out a pot. He found the components of something warm, which he would make from scratch the way his mother had made it when he was small, because learned warmth was still warmth and warmth was what was needed. "Something warm," he said. "I can do that." 3 months later, a delegation from the Velhari Compact's Cultural Liaison Office formally contacted Kareth Station's administration with an inquiry regarding an unusual adoption case. They had become aware, through standard compact records processing of the case. A Velhari child of no house designation, who had been formally and permanently adopted by a human transit coordinator at Kareth Station. A case that had proceeded through standard compact and human jurisdictional channels, and been finalized without any notification to the Velhari Cultural Liaison Office, which was not technically a violation of any protocol since the no-house designation meant there was no house to notify, but which they felt they should address. They requested a meeting. Marcus went to the meeting. He sat across from two Velhari officials in formal house robes, older, silver-haired, with the particular carried stillness of people who have held significant authority for a long time and have stopped needing to demonstrate it. They had files. They had an agenda. They worked through it methodically. They asked about his qualifications. He answered. They asked about his intentions for sales cultural continuity. He described what he'd done, the cultural liaison documents from Versailles assessment, the research, the connections he'd been trying to establish with the Velhari community network on the station, the language materials he'd found and that Sale was working through, the ceremonies he'd read about and intended to ask her if she wanted to observe. They asked what he understood about the significance of the house designation to Velhari identity. He said he understood that it was not merely administrative. He said he understood that what Sale had lost was not just a legal category, but a thread connecting her to history, to lineage, to the sense of belonging to something that predated her and would outlast her. He said he didn't know if he could give her all of that. He said he intended to try to give her as much of it as he could find. He was not sure when the tone of the room shifted. It was not an announced thing. The Velhari officials did not change expression or register. But the quality of the space changed, the way a room changes when the people in it have moved from one position to another without getting up. The senior official, her name was Elder Tessivsal, and she was very old, with eyes that had watched the outer corridor collapse and the years after and the still after that followed, set her notes aside. She said, in careful standard, "The child came to a human's desk with 3 Velhari merchant tokens from before the unification and asked to purchase a father." "Yes," Marcus said. "And your response was to begin the administrative process." "I started the paperwork," he said. "Yes." Elder Tessivsal looked at him for a long time. Then she said something in Velhari in a formal register that was not translated automatically because it was not addressed to him. It was addressed to the other official, who responded briefly. Then she turned back to Marcus. "There is a concept in Velhari," she said, "for which standard has no precise equivalent. The closest rendering is the knowing that arrives before the evidence does, when something in you recognizes something in another before the mind has processed the information." She paused. The child, when she chose you, was operating on this. It is not irrational. Among Velhari, it is considered one of the more reliable forms of judgment. Another pause. The child knew what she was doing. He nodded. The meeting concluded with a formal offer from the Velhari Compact's Cultural Liaison Program. Language tutoring resources for both Marcus and Sale, a connection to the Velhari community network at Kareth Station, access to cultural and historical archives, and an invitation to community observances for any ceremonies relevant to Sale's developmental stage. The formal language of the offer also contained, in the subordinate clause of the 7th point, a note that the question of Sale's house designation was a matter the compact intended to place under active review, given her changed circumstances. Marcus thanked them. Walking back to level 7, he stopped at the market level. He found the stall where the vendor had started setting aside the hard-to-find dried fruit. He bought a bag. He took the lift to 7, let himself in. The apartment was quiet. She was at school. She was always at school now. She had taken to it with the same focused intensity she took to everything, and her teachers had started using words like exceptional in their updates, which Marcus read with the particular feeling of someone who is not surprised but is still moved. He put the fruit on the kitchen table. He went to the windowsill and watered the plant, which was, 3 months after Sale had claimed the responsibility, doing better than it had done in the 2 years Marcus had owned it. The leaves were full and even, the color deep, the soil consistently maintained at the right moisture level. He suspected she watered it every morning the first thing, before she did anything else. He'd never asked, he wasn't going to ask. He stood at the window and watched the docking bay, the slow, purposeful movement of cargo haulers and transit ships, and the occasional diplomatic vessel moving at the dignified pace that suggested it was not in a hurry because it did not need to be. Until he heard the lift in the corridor and then her footsteps, and then the particular sound the door made when she opened it, which he had learned to know. "I'm home," she said. 2 words, the most ordinary 2 words in any language. The words that presuppose a home and a person who belongs in it, and the fact that returning to it is something worth noting. "How was school?" he said. She dropped her bag by the door, the easy, habitual gesture of someone who knows the bag will still be there when they come back for it, that things stay where you put them, that you don't have to hold on to everything all the time. "Good. Navigation theory. I was fastest at the calculations. Instructor Methreya said my spatial visualization scores are in the high range for Velhari my age, which means they're in the very high range compared to the mixed assessment baseline." A pause. "She said I should look at applied navigation programs when I'm older." "That's excellent," Marcus said. "What do you think about that?" She came to the kitchen and saw the bag on the table and stopped. She looked at it. She picked it up and held it in both hands, and she looked at it for just a moment the way she had looked at it the first time, with the expression of someone seeing a thing that means more than the thing itself. "You found some," she said. "The vendor holds them for me now. He gets a shipment in every 2 weeks. She looked up at him. The amber eyes, the silver-green face, the expression he had watched move incrementally from guarded to here, to this, which was still careful, still measured, but warm in a way that didn't need to protect itself. She came and leaned against his arm, the easy, habitual contact she'd started doing sometime in the last month, standing close, shoulder to arm, as if that was just where she stood now, as if proximity was something she'd decided to allow herself. "I found out today," she said, into the space in front of her rather than at him. "There's a word in standard for the thing where you decide something belongs to you before you have it yet." He thought about 3 coins on a desk, about box 7 of container row C, about a flickering light panel, and a plant that someone had decided they were going to water, about 6 lines of a file and the infinite insufficiency of administrative records to contain a person. "What's the word?" he said. "Claim," she said. "You claim something before it's officially yours. You decide it's yours and you act like it's yours until it becomes yours. A pause. Some people think that's dishonest, but some people think it's just knowing where you're going before you've arrived. She was quiet for a moment. I claimed you, at the desk, before you'd agreed to anything. He put his arm around her, the way he did now, easily, without ceremony. She leaned into it. Yeah, he said, I know. Were you upset about it, she said, when you figured it out? No, he said, I thought you were right. She made the small sound. This time it went all the way. Brief and real and completely hers, the laugh she was still learning to trust herself with, the one that kept going a little further each time. He catalogued it privately in the same way he catalogued everything. As a fact about a specific person, irreplaceable, belonging to no one else. Outside, the station moved around them the way stations moved, the constant, low hum of 10,000 overlapping systems, the rhythm of shift changes and cargo transfers and the slow procession of ships coming and going. Somewhere in Sector 9, the camp existed. He knew that. He thought about it in the morning when he got to his desk sometimes, and during the long processing surges when the queue didn't end. He thought about the other children, the other 6-line files, the other cargo boxes. He didn't know what to do with that thinking, except to keep doing the work as well as he could do it, and to come home. But right now there was dinner to make, and a navigation theory assignment she wanted to walk him through, and a bag of dried fruit from the outer corridor on the kitchen table. And the plant on the windowsill was thriving, green and full, and making up actively for every month it had barely survived. And Sale was beside him with the unhurried ease of someone who has arrived somewhere and knows it. He thought about what Elder Tessif Saul had said, the knowing that arrives before the evidence. The child knew what she was doing. He thought she had 3 rusty coins, old luck passed from hand to hand, kept in a small woven pouch through years of camp and freight dark, and the long patient waiting that she was good at. She had brought the right currency. She had just gotten the exchange wrong. You didn't buy a father with 3 coins. You bought, maybe, a beginning, the first motion of something that kept going afterward under its own momentum, growing the way things grow when they finally get what they needed all along, which is just enough warmth, enough consistency, enough of someone who doesn't make a thing bigger than it is and writes down what you tell them so they don't forget. Enough of a face that doesn't send things back. What are we having? She said, from the other side of the kitchen, having materialized there while he was thinking. Something warm, he said. Still, she said, you always say something warm. Something warm is always right, he said. She considered this for a moment. Okay, she said. But with the green things in it this time. You always leave out the green things. He got out the pot. He got out the green things. You're very specific, he said. You said to tell you what I want, she said. I'm telling you. He turned on the heat. She sat on the counter, a thing she'd recently started doing, as if discovering that the counter was a valid place to be and she was allowed to be there, and watched him cook, with the focused, cataloging attention she turned on everything she found interesting, which, he had learned, was most things. The station hummed. The plant stood in the window, taking whatever light it could and doing more with it than anyone had expected. The stars, somewhere past the outer ring, were doing what stars do, staying, burning, being there regardless of whether anything was watching. Marcus Hale cooked something warm. Sale of No House, who was now Sale Hale by compact provisional documentation, and would be Sale Hale by full compact registration as soon as the review completed, sat on the counter and talked about navigation theory, and the spatial visualization scores, and the vendor at the market level who had once let her take an extra sample of the dried fruit without charging for it. She talked the way she was still learning to talk, without the constant readiness to stop, without the monitoring for whether she was taking up too much, with her hands moving a little when something interested her, with the half-smile, unhurried, that had started appearing when she forgot to hold it back. 3 coins and everything after. Everything after was this: ordinary, warm, specific hers, theirs, the life that had been waiting at the end of 18 hours in the dark, at the end of a desk that no one had expected to matter, bought for exactly the right price.